Hello, and welcome to another episode of Boundless Body Radio. I'm your host, Casey Ruff, and today we have another amazing guest to introduce to you now. David Wolfe is a certified high performance coach and food addiction coach. David received his master's in clinical nutrition from The Ohio State University in 2012 and worked as a registered dietitian for 10 years in critical care, bariatric surgery, and elderly care. David eventually received his food addiction training at INFACT in 2017, and since that time has been an understudy to former podcast guest and sugar addiction specialist Bitten Jonnson. David is currently a faculty member for the Bitten Holistic Medicine for Addiction program. David has had his own battles with sugar and grain addiction and has identified other outlets, namely coffee, screens, alcohol, and more. David is the co-author of the groundbreaking book, The Fix for Cravings, along with Cynthia Myers Morison. David is a vocal advocate for understanding addiction interaction disorder, championing the idea that addiction is a singular beast with many masks. As a visionary co-founder of SugarX Global, David offers an online food addiction recovery platform using his holistic blueprint of the acronym CARE, which stands for Connection, Action, Recovery Protection, and Education. David Wolfe, what an absolute honor it is to welcome you to Boundless Body Radio.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Such an honor to host you. I told you off the air that I have followed you for a very long time and absolutely love your work. I don't often start my podcast by saying what I'm about to say. I'd be more likely to say this on the ice with my hockey buddies to try to get somebody a little bit wound up. But I've been spending some time with your mom.
Yeah. I hear. Yeah, you've put her to work.
Oh man,
Yeah.
Judy Wolfe, man. So got to interview her. She came very highly recommended. So we got to talk. We got to have our conversation with her on her podcast. She mentioned that she was just starting up strength training, and so I put her on the spot during the show and said, "That's really cool. Like, can I invite you back in like a month or two so you can tell us like about the process and how things are going?" And she agreed to it, but then messaged me afterwards. She's like, "Oh, now you really put me on the spot. You're gonna have to teach me how to do this." So we
Yeah,
did a few sessions.
she's so eager to learn, and I remember as a kid, she was always like on the floor in the living room at like 5 or 6 a.m. with my dad doing their back exercises. They're like so disciplined about their self-care. Like it's
Wow.
even when they're on the road, they're like on a hotel floor or whatever, doing their thing. So that's awesome. I know she's been talking about that for a while.
Yeah, she definitely has. It's been really fun. And yes, you can tell she's very eager to learn. She's very smart. You can tell she has a really good base, but her level of care of like, am I doing this right? Is my tempo okay? She wanted to record every session so she could watch it back. And she's been taking notes and like trying to explain to her that you might not like the workouts themselves. Like it's uncomfortable. But if you can do this right, you can have lots of different benefits. And you'll feel a lot better over time. You get more and more used to it over time. So it's been really great to work
Absolutely.
with her, man.
Yeah, she's a very willing participant. Absolutely.
I love it.
Yeah,
That's great,
she's
man.
such a role model for some of our people. So
Yeah,
I think she's a relatively simple person, but she takes this stuff real serious. So
I
I
love
think
it.
that's really cool.
I love it. Well, I know you received some of your food addictive tendencies when it comes, to diet and sugar addiction from her. She had to
Yeah.
suffer through it for so many years. We've talked to Anna Freeling about her,
Oh
amazing
yeah.
story and getting over sugar addiction. And I'm just as I'm preparing for this conversation, I think about let's go with Anna in particular. What an amazing story of turning her life completely around. This person is so happy and grateful and is just like so stoked about life and it's so different now that she's gotten past the sugar addiction and it's all like, roses and rainbows and life is amazing. I look at, your mom, I look at you and your stories and how you've been able to recover from sugar addiction. It's so much better on the other side. Me personally getting away from sugar and eating a carnivore diet. I know that my days are just it's great. I don't think about sugar. I don't have anxiety the way that I used to, and all these things. It's so beneficial. And I contrast that with the people that I work with, like every single day. Like I didn't have to collect a massive amount of these types of stories for several weeks in preparation for this conversation. This was like just today. Like the client who wants to lose weight, has already lost 100 pounds, is feeling really good maintaining it, but went to the bowl of popcorn and felt terrible for 2 days. And then there's the other client who's been getting some really good results also doing more carnivore, yet yesterday was a crap day and he had to go out, and then his kids offered him a cinnamon roll and he ate it and he slept terribly. His joints started to hurt again. And there's just like endless amounts of these stories of these people who I don't know if they're sugar addicts or not. I can't make that judgment on them, but like they're actively eating something that they know very well is going to do them harm. It's tough out there, man. This is really tough.
Yeah, and it's not a knowledge problem. It really isn't a knowledge problem. I mean, we say like information doesn't equal transformation, you know. So we need to give people an experience of recovery, you know, because I can tell you what to do and I can tell you the kind of books you need to read and the kind of people you need to be around, but you have to experience it yourself. So it's really interesting you bring that up like right off the bat. So one of the first things we came up with when I was writing my book was I was working in a bariatric center and the guy reached out to me. He's like, I'm in CCAP, and CCAP was an addiction alcohol drug addiction unit, and he was doing like psycho ed for people who were coming out of treatment and going into like a more of a long-term placement. And so he was like, you know, it makes sense. Maybe people coming out of bariatric surgery would be interested in kind of like learning about this. And I was like, I'm all in. I mean, yeah, let's go. You know, so we sat down with him and he came up with these three things: guilt, debate, and romance. And that ended up making up trigger-free triangle. So basically, if you makes you feel guilty, if you debate whether you should or shouldn't do it, or if there's like that rendezvous, like that sort of like secret calling to eat it, then it's a trigger, right? And so I think it just brings clarity. You just like, oh, cinnamon roll. Yeah. Am I questioning whether I should or shouldn't eat? Mm-hmm. You know, how am I gonna feel after I eat it? Okay. Is there like this kind of like secret, kind of like rendezvous? And it's all there. You know, it's just about how honest are we being with ourselves.
That's a really good point. It seems to be like this one time, or I only had a little bit. You know what I mean? How many of
Right.
those are they really having? It's so difficult because you're just going to justify this one thing. The brain is so powerful to just say like, oh, well, I only had three or whatever. You know what I mean? Or I didn't have one yesterday, so I earned one today. Like it's amazing the tricks that we'll play on ourselves that we know make us miserable.
Yeah. I mean, I tell people, give me 30 seconds. I can make anything sound like a really good idea. I mean, I can. I have that kind of brain. I can just convince myself that I need to buy that bright red cherry electric guitar. I mean, I can just do that, you know, and it doesn't. And so I have to like check myself, you know, and be honest. And I think the world has made it really easy for us to just think that we'll be okay, whether it's diet culture or end caps at stores or, you know, putting bright colored foods at I have two toddlers, they're eye level, you know, they're like going nose to nose with Toucan Sam, you know what I mean? And that's just the reality that we're living in. And so I think it makes we have to be more adamant about how we want to live. Like I have to be really intentional about the kind of choices that I make. So I kind of I was doing a business training and this guy was talking about brands and he was talking about like Apple. So like Apple makes decisions based on its brand. Like someone comes to them with like a really complicated electronic device, they're going to be like, no, that's off brand. We don't do complicated. We do intuitive and simple. Or someone would go up to Harley Davidson and they'd be like, we want to make a really quiet bike. And Harley's like, why would we want to make a quiet bike? So my brand is like, I just don't do these things anymore. So like my brand, the way I live my life makes decisions for me. And it makes it so much easier for me. Those things are off the table. Like, because I know what happens when I eat a cinnamon roll. I don't know how to eat a cinnamon roll. The floodgates open and it's over. So, and I don't know how many days, weeks, months, years it's going to take till I stop.
Mm,
So I just don't play those games anymore. But it took
yeah,
me a long time to get to that point. And I didn't struggle like a lot of food addicts struggle. I never had a weight problem. Weight was never part of my story. It's just, you know, my dad was relatively small. I ended up having kind of like a beer belly. He never drank, but that's just where he put weight. But then when he started eating clean, it went away. And I've been the same size since I was basically in high school. But but it was the insanity, lack of focus. So it takes what it takes. But so a lot of my clients don't have the kind of symptomatology that I had.
yeah,
They're more focused on things like body weight, vanity, not being able to, keep up with their kids or
yeah.
things like that. So we have to look at all that.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And I do appreciate your perspective and your story. Maybe we could get into that a little bit more because, yes, a lot of people are coming from this because they want to lose weight, they want to lose fat. They don't feel healthy in what we would consider like a kind of a physical way. And I guess that was, kind of my experience as well. Like when I was, noshing on carbohydrates from time to time, it was just mental. Like I didn't have tons of weight to lose, but I had anxiety that I didn't think I had and that kind of thing. And getting on the other side was so much better. But let's go into your personal story of when you started to pick up on this. What was it like growing up in the household with your mom and yeah, all the things that you had to deal with?
Yeah, so um I knew the kind of mom that was going to come home based on how she ate. So we had this local family restaurant. It was called Eddie's Pub. Used to go there all the time. So she would, if she was like doing what she was doing, like doing well, she'd get something called Bake Haddock European, and she'd be specific, no breadcrumbs. So it was a piece of fish with sliced like peppers, onions, tomatoes under the broiler. Okay. Or she'd get a large veggie pizza. I knew the kind of mom that was going to come from home from that restaurant based on which entree she chose. Now, this is when I don't know, 7, 8, 9. So it was a
Wow.
drastic shift depending on the way that she was eating. I mean, my mom is punctual, patient, compassionate, kind. She's the kind of person you want to call Verizon customer service for you, like when you have an issue, because she's adamant about what she needs, but she's very kind and patient about it. But like when she's in the food, she's not like that. She's brash, she's impulsive, it's very me, self-centered. So it's very different than like sort of the Judy you met. So I think like I had that and I could see that. And I would like come home from school as a little kid and I'd like rate the pantry, but like I'd rate it discreetly. Like if there was 6 packs of fruit snacks in a box, I'd eat 5 and hide the wrappers, and I was always thin. So everyone else thought that babysitter was stealing food. It was my sister. My sister always had a weight problem, but it was, I just passed under the radar for like 20 years. And I mean, I remember, stealing food. I remember getting caught by a clerk and like my mom had to like pay for this thing that I stole. And like there was things like that happening, but I just think it wasn't on the surface because I didn't look like I had a problem. And I think I really want to encourage people to look at that aspect of it, that just weight is just one thing. But then I ended up after high school, I went overseas. I lived in Israel for 10 months, just sort of between high school and college. And I was introduced to alcohol, and that definitely became part of my life. And even when I didn't want to drink, I was drinking. And then I came home. I went to culinary school, which didn't help. Then I got really into bread baking, definitely didn't help. I became an artisan bread baker. I had a blog. If you've seen the movie Julie and Julia, I did the same thing with Jeffrey Hamelman. He wrote a bread book. I baked like 185 loaves of bread in like a year. Like it was
Wow.
nuts. So it was just part of my addiction. And then eventually I become an RD, a dietitian. I'm helping people. Literally, I'm helping food addicts, and I have no idea that I'm a food addict. Like I'm totally and unaware. It's like that's how the disease operates. It operates through denial. So there's like layers of denial over denial over denial. And like I would say that if you think you're an addict or you are an addict or you're an addict in long-term recovery, you have denial. It's just a matter of finding it and being aware of it and being open-minded to it when you do notice it and see it. Because it's so easy for us to just sequester it down and stuff it down or hide it under rationalization, justification, like what you were talking about earlier. So ultimately, I end up in a training with this woman, Esther Helga. She's from Iceland. She has INFACT, International Food Addiction Counselor Training Program. My mom and I both were in the first graduating class. She does a screening for me. Because we're about to go to Iceland to do a treatment. And so it's like a pre-treatment protocol. And she says to me, I think you're an early stage food addict. And I was like, I had no defense. I don't know. I just had no defense. My mom's a food addict. She comes from a long line of food addicts. There's addiction in her family. Like you shake my family tree, a bunch of addicts just fall out. Like I didn't
Wow.
have anything to say. So I said, okay,
Mhm.
yeah, you're probably right. I didn't get well right away, but that was like the beginning of me like starting to face the fact that, yeah, this was me, even though I was normal sized and no one knew what was going on. I look back in hindsight, I can see all the things that were happening to me, that correlated with the disease of addiction. And then I started to help myself and get help. And then eventually I lost a job. I was laid off. And I sought out people who were working on addiction, a community of people, and they weren't food addicts. Primarily, they were getting off of alcohol and hard drugs. But I had people around me that understood addiction. So I started getting in touch with the language of it and, kind of the concepts of recovery. And I just started plugging them in with food. I knew that if I didn't give up sugar, grains, and alcohol all at once, it wasn't going to work. So I kind of struggled until I was willing to do that. And then as soon as I did that, that was sort of the beginning of where everything sort of shifted for me. And so I
Wow.
think we need to be honest with ourselves about what we're addicted to. And then once we put substances down, we need to be honest with, is there anything else? And so I always talk about addiction interaction disorder because it's important. So people will be like, I used to be addicted to alcohol, now I'm addicted to sugar. Well, in all likelihood, you're probably addicted to sugar first because you took it first. But the reality is it's just addiction. They're just different outlets. It's not like we're not going to treat them any differently. We're just going to look at it like our disease is morphing so that when it morphs, we have to compensate in the way that we live. Right. So, and that's why, my bio, grains, sugar, alcohol screens, and when I say screen addiction, I just mean screens. I'm not talking about pornography. I'm talking about just like a screen, like a computer, a device. And for instance, I'm an online entrepreneur. I cannot get away from screens. Like I have to manage that differently than I can manage sugar, grains, and alcohol. I have to live with that. So, but they're all applicable, and the same tools work for all of them. I think it's just a matter of being honest and being willing. So I guess that's a short form of what happened to me. And I think bottom for me was just I chose to stop digging. I chose that enough was enough, and anyone can decide that that moment is right now. If you're willing to say like, this is it, I'm done digging, you've reached bottom. Or you could continue on for decades, really. And food addiction is a very slow killer.
Yeah.
You know, to the people
Yeah.
to the point is that people they're not calling the cause of death food addiction, right? They're calling it
Right.
diabetes, hypertension, high blood pressure, obesity, metabolic syndrome. But what's behind all that?
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, that's amazing. You mentioned denial being a huge part of that. What were some of yours? Was it that you were not overweight, essentially? Was that kind
I
of a
think I
major
just
one for
had
you?
no idea I was an addict.
Mm.
Um, and then I would deny outlets, like I would deny caffeine as an outlet, until I would recognize that it would come up. I'm trying to think of other elements of denial. Well, denial, I needed help because for all extensive purposes, like I had a job, I was keeping it, I had good friends, I had a home, that there was something wrong.
Yeah.
Denial, and I just would hide that. Well, it's
Yeah.
normal to, if you look at my family tree, like it's normal to eat like the way I was eating.
Mm.
You come to a family party at my house, I literally have uncles that will park in front of the fridge. You know what I mean?
Wow.
They'll just sit. There's an island, and they'll sit between the island and the fridge.
Yeah.
That's like, and the whole party, and then that's not normal behavior.
Right.
But I can normalize that behavior.
Mm.
So I think it's things like that.
Yeah, interesting. One of my favorite sayings is when pain increases, hearing improves, right? Like you mentioned,
Yeah.
like the digging and digging the
Yeah.
hole, right? It's so true. So we really truly do have to get to that point, right? Where it sucks so bad to suck. And like, it's just the suffering is too much that we're finally willing to face the pain around it.
I
Is there
think
any
it's
other
like
way?
there was like, what is the saying? It's like I couldn't change until the pain of staying the same was greater than the pain of change.
Yeah.
And so I think, yeah, but I think like we have power over that decision. Like I can decide that, like that I've had enough. And then, but if we're lying to ourselves about that and we're fooling ourselves that we think we have had enough, but we haven't, there's probably a relapse in us. And so I define a relapse as picking up something that I've given up 6 months after I've given it up. So, and I think a lot of food addicts, a lot of addicts in general will call themselves chronic relapsers, and they'll make themselves unique. And they're just regular garden variety addicts. They just haven't stopped using. So they're in what we call continued use. So I'm just careful, and I say that out loud any opportunity I can, because I do think people put these labels on themselves and they make it like it's impossible for them to get better. And I've seen those people get better. I see it on a regular basis. So I think we just have to be careful what we call ourselves. But yeah, denial is huge. And like I talked to Vera Tarman a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, "What's the biggest problem you face?" And that's the biggest problem I face is denial. That's it. I mean, that's the biggest problem. I mean, how do we convince someone that there's something wrong when they don't think anything is wrong?
Yeah.
It's hard.
It's a great point, man.
But
yeah,
I love the pain point. That's good. And I like the hearing thing, because we start listening when we're uncomfortable.
Right. But it just takes that 2x4 across the face. You know what I mean? Before any of us are willing to
100%.
consider that. That sucks. So what were some of the key components in your recovery? Like I know you mentioned, 12-step programs, and I get a lot of pushback when I suggest, sugar addiction recovery programs that have steps that sound like AA meeting. And you're right. I think that is part of that denial, is people think like, oh, I'm not going to do meetings. I don't want to, hi, my name is, or whatever. But like,
right.
what were part of your components of recovery that really helped you, that maybe you were resisting, that ended up being super helpful for you?
So, I mean, my journey started off in a 12-step program. I mean, actually all three of us have. And I think first of all, there's a complete misconception about what happens in 12-step rooms. So if you're curious or you think find an open meeting and go, so you can have an accurate representation, and go to a couple, and then you'll know what happens there, because it's probably not what you think, and it's definitely not how the media portrays it. So that just want to put that out there. Okay, so definitely
I appreciate that.
And so in that format, there's open meetings and closed meetings, and a closed meeting is only for a person that struggles with the substance. So like not even their family could go. And an open meeting is open to anyone. I mean, whether you work in this field and you're interested, or you're a doctor or a nurse or you're a student or whatever, you can go. I mean, just as a person in the public. So just throwing it out there. And I mean, my recovery started there, but I don't think that's where I had the most growth. I think that was what got me to stop using, but I needed tools, and they needed to be practical. And what I mean by that is they got me to a result. They think a lot of times, like some of the tools, or I'm using my fingers, I'm air quoting tools, that people use in recovery, things like praying and meditating, and I think those are tools, but that doesn't necessarily get me to a result. But when I have a tool called a resentment machine, and basically I start off with a resentment, and it gets me to responsibility. Like that's the result of the tool. Or one of our tools we use is called the Craving Self-Discovery tool, right? It takes us from where are we now? We're confused about the addiction and how it's affected us, to, oh my goodness, this is where I'm at and I need help. So it's like, I think the things for me were community, connection, which is like when you read my bio, you read care, right? Connection is everything. Connection is the opposite of addiction. Addiction is alienation and isolation. We isolate ourselves. Like I'll be honest with you, when I was a kid, I could be around 100 people that love me, like really like family, and I could feel alone. That's how alone I felt. I had alienated myself from others, and I had alienated myself from myself. So, and like loving parents, beautiful home, wonderful. I lived on a cul-de-sac. It's like I had great neighbors. It wasn't anything. It wasn't situational. It wasn't environment. It was my brain. So I need things that can fight against that. And being clean doesn't make all that stuff disappear. It reduces the volume of it, but there's still a tape that plays in my head that wants to kill me.
Wow.
It's just I know how to respond to it today.
Yeah.
And I can, and almost automatically, most of the stuff that comes up just disappears automatically because I've done the reps. But yeah, so I don't even remember what your original question was at this point.
That was a great explanation. And you actually unlocked something that I haven't thought about in a long time. And I can't remember the author, and I haven't even read the book. I've just heard him do different interviews. And it's called
Okay.
Chasing the Scream, excuse me. And it's all about drug addiction. And it's the way we've been like handling drug addiction in many different countries and like maybe finding better ways to do it. So for example, we are used to in this country, if somebody's a drug addict, we lock them in a box and convict them of a crime, and which makes it less likely that they're ever going to be connected to anything else ever again. And they have huge problems with that. And he contrasts it to, I want to say it was Portugal, that was having huge problems with addictions maybe 2 decades ago. And they got a council together to say, like, okay, let's figure this out. What can we do? And the council came back and said, if you want drugs to go away, if you want addiction to get better, we need to just kill the war on drugs. Let's stop punishing drug addicts for being drug addicts. And so they took all the money that they were doing on the war on drugs, and they used it
Right.
to like subsidize wages for drug addicts. They could work as a mechanic, and the government would pay like half their wage for a year or 2 years or whatever it was. And they found that that helped a lot. So whether you agree or disagree with the policies and the politics of all of it, it's an interesting thing to say. And this was exactly the point that you make. The addiction, I'm sorry, the opposite of addiction is not like sobriety. It's like connection. When you're
Right.
connected, that makes the biggest difference. He made one more point I thought was so interesting. We all cite the study with the rats, and the rats who do the water laced with cocaine or just the regular water or whatever, and they all prefer the cocaine. And he made the point that like there was somebody who saw this study and said, well, this is stupid. Like, of course, a rat is not going to want to sit in some box and do nothing all day. Let's make a really fun environment for all these rats and see what those rats do. And so there were things they could do and exercise and other rats that they could play with or have sex with, or whatever the rat things the rats were doing. And they found
Right.
that absolutely the rats were not preferring the cocaine water anymore. They preferred the regular water because they had good lives and had other things that were connected to. So I think that was such an important point. I'm really glad you made that, and I didn't want that to pass.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because I've actually been thinking about this a lot this past week. Like, I want to call a cop and ask him what percent of his responsibility as a cop is somehow connected to addiction. Because I think it's going to be I'm just going to throw a number out there, probably 50%. Somewhere between the paperwork and the domestic issues, and it's probably exorbitant, and like, why do right, the war on drugs did not end drugs. In fact, it made them worse. And my friend Bill, who came up with the guilt debate and the romance thing, he said, Davis, this is a supply and demand problem. It doesn't matter what happens to the supply as long as there's a demand. And so what do we do? Yeah, I mean, hey, kudos to Portugal for trying something different. It was probably,
Yeah,
people thought it was crazy, I'm sure.
right.
But yeah, I mean, let's make it more encouraging for people to stop using,
Mm.
because that's already discouraging enough to someone who's in a lot of pain.
Yep.
And basically, it was really interesting. So Eric Clapton on 60 Minutes, I think it was with Dan Rathers, right? He's interviewed and he's like, was heroin your first drug? And he was like, no, it was sugar. It was like bread and butter and
Wow.
sugar at the age of 5. And he's like, and then he says something like, I used it to change the way that I felt. And so I take that now. That's my new definition of a drug. Right. And so there are good drugs and there are bad drugs, right? So because like I can put my head on my little girl's heart and hear her heart boom, 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 boom. And that changed the way that I feel, or, I could bump a line and that'll change the way that I feel. But one drifts slowly back down to normal and one plummets and I crash. So, I think we do a lot of exercise can change the way that you feel. And exercise can become a problem for certain people.
That's right.
So, yeah. So I just think the way that we look at these things has to change.
Yeah.
And we need to think bird's eye view
Mm.
to get a better sense of what's really going on.
Interesting. I mean, go watch some of the videos of baby's first taste of ice cream and tell me they're
Oh
not
yeah,
little
yeah. It was just on
crackheads.
Twitter, and I
Oh
saw
my
that Elon Musk
goodness.
posted it, and it got a lot of flack. And there were people in the low carb community, and Nick Norwitz and other people making comments about it. And that's one of the things we show when we first do an event. Like, we're like, look at this innocent little girl, and look what happened to her brain, like that, like at the
Like,
snap of a fingers. It was just like massive transition.
Yeah.
And we don't know what's going to happen to that little girl. She might end up being fine,
Sure.
but I do not think we're designed to have that level of stimulus at that age,
Right. I
or at
agree.
all,
Yeah,
or at
I
all.
agree. I agree. I was talking to this with a client about this with a client today, and it's thinking like this is why it takes such a minuscule amount of carbohydrates to trigger something like insulin and fat gain, is because we live in a world where it's everywhere, and you can't even hardly imagine even going back 100, 200 years, let alone all the hundreds of thousands of years that we evolved to eat. Sugar was exceedingly rare, and of course, it would
Yeah.
reward you as much as possible. When you get it, you need to hoard it because it is so rare. When you get it, you'll store up, you'll save things, you'll have more energy, you'll store fat, because you're going to go back into a world where sugar is non-existent. And again, if you're used to something all the time, if you're used to everybody telling you that red cars are fast, you'll just kind of start to think that red cars are fast. And in this environment of sugar availability, you can't even imagine a world that it wasn't that like this.
Yeah, in like in the addiction world, there's this topic called, when they sort of try to describe the brain, it's called salience. And so what that is how important something is to remember. That's what salience is. So if you were, I'm talking about thousands of years ago, like you running through, you were doing your nomad thing, you were hunting and gathering, whatever, and you remembered in July, or that time, roughly that time of year, when the moon was at this whatever meridian, there were blueberries in this quadrant. Like you're going to remember where the blueberries were. Those are important for your survival. So addicts, they remember these things. So I remember I was planning a trip to Nashville. This was before I got clean. Like the whole trip was about food. Everything was about food, the whole itinerary, and it was like, and I look back at that and I laugh, and it was totally insane. But you were saying like the smallest amount of carbohydrates. So I know that if I eat a blueberry, I'm talking about like one singular blueberry, within 24 hours, I've eaten a baked potato.
Mm.
Guaranteed, without exception. I can promise you that. So I don't eat blueberries, you know, because I don't eat potatoes. And I know one blueberry will lead me to potatoes. So I don't know what it is for you or for them, but there is this sort of like A leads to B, and that we need to learn and look at the data and say, oh, that's funny. So we have this thing, it's called cue, custom, consequence. So Q is like a trigger. So it'd be like, I'm going to a party. My custom is, well, I normally, have a couple of pieces of pie, and my consequence is I feel like as my mom would say, like a sorry piece of doo-doo. Like you just feel awful, guilt and shame and regret and remorse. And then so, but if we change the custom, we change the consequence. So go to the party, feeling a craving, go for a walk, I feel energized and I feel more present. So it's like a total shift. But when we have people write it out and look at it and see like, oh, what's the thinking going on behind it? What are the emotions behind it? They get emotionally attached to the outcome. Like you were talking about the more pain you have, the more you hear. Right? So they get in touch with the way it's going to make you feel when you do a certain thing, or you eat a certain thing, or you don't do a certain thing, you don't eat a certain thing. You can get attached to the outcome, and it makes it a lot more beneficial. Not more beneficial, but it's a lot more easy for you to follow through. And I think most people that are struggling with this, they're struggling with follow through. They're not struggling with information or data. No, they just have a hard time pulling trigger on it and staying
Yeah.
true to their commitments.
Mm.
And I think, again, that goes back to the connection piece, because as an addict, I, generally speaking, not now, but I didn't really care about what happened to me. So it was easy for me to destroy me. But if it affected my kids, and I'm not talking about things about my addiction, because like the addiction runs the show, but if you're using, so like I would sacrifice things for my kids if I was an active addict. I know that that's just the way the disease operates. But if it affected my kids, I would be thinking differently about it as a person, because I don't care about me. I have very little self-worth. I'm taking such bad care of myself. I'm not, like, and we look at addicts and food addicts in general, and we look, they're not seeing doctors. And I remember my first person who helped me get off alcohol, my friend Mike. He said, I went to the doctor, he told me to stop drinking, never saw a doctor again. That's how an addict responds to that kind of feedback. They don't go, so I think we have to approach them differently. And you may have to approach yourself differently. The way that you talk to yourself, the way that you encourage change.
Sure.
So yeah, it's crazy.
Wow. Wow. Well, we have to apologize for the listener to being subjected to Judy's obscene language there. So the
I
doo-doo thing
know,
will have to.
isn't it? She's so funny. Did she do like the mush gush crunch munch thing with you?
No.
She's got like, we call them Judaisms. So like it's like, and we are Jewish, so it's funny. But like she'll be like, oh, she'll be talking about how she had bags and boxes around her when she was active, and she'd be like, oh, the mush and gush, the munch, the crunch, and she's like all into this like language, and it's so funny. People love it. It's
That's
just who
great.
she is.
Judaism. That's amazing. Man, I love that. Okay, so I'm really enjoying where this conversation is going. And I want to ask on behalf of the addicts, how can they feel hope from all this? When I'm talking, starting this conversation, talking about the people who are actively doing something that's harmful, how can they start to do a better job recognizing that? And then I also want to ask the question for people that are on the other side of it, you or I at this point, how can we be a better support to those types of people who are actively doing things that are harmful for them that they themselves want to step away from?
So there was a guy named, I'm going to answer the second question first. So remind me what the first question was in a minute. Okay. So there was a guy named David Sandler, and he had inherited a business in snack sales, believe it or not. And from some legal snafu, his partner was able to basically kick him out of his own family's business. And so he was in immense pain because he was doing a great job at his job, but also he was doing it in such a little amount of time because he was so efficient that he was on the golf course all day, and his partner didn't like that. So basically his partner found a way to get him out of the business. So he ended up in a lot of pain. And then he dedicated himself to ruining his former partner's life. But the point, what he did was he discovered that people make most of their decisions based on pain. So one of the things that I think that we can do for other people is encouraging them to discover their pain. So,
Mm.
and we can do it pretty simply. It's not like when you're having a conversation with someone like, oh, what was that like? How did that make you feel? That must have bothered you, didn't it? So, and then it just gives them an opportunity to answer the question in an open-ended way where it becomes a conversation. But all you're doing is you're just feeding them back what they're telling you. It's just their experience. But again, it gives them an option, because I don't think, first of all, most people aren't willing to have these kinds of conversations because they can be uncomfortable. So I think it's a service. Like, I feel like I'm in service when I help someone discover something. Then the other thing I want to talk about is enabling, because enabling does happen. And it's very common in the addictive home, in the dynamics of it. And I'll tell you again, my friend Mike, he said to me, he's like, who am I to stand between you and your bottom? So if you're helping an addict use, stop. Let them experience the pain of active using. Because if you give them a safe place to stay and a couch to sleep on, like, I mean, in that example, or if you bring them home ice cream, even though you don't know that it's their drug of choice, I mean, we are enabling them. And as a parent whose kids eat sugar, I mean, I have this like love affair with feeding people. It's in my blood. So I have to be really conscious. And like, if I feed them the wrong thing and I know it's wrong, guess what I feel? Guilt. So, I mean, it comes back to us. Now, what was your first question? There
First
was
question
just
was
one
for
for
that.
you.
I love that answer, by the way. The first question was how can an addict hear this and start to recognize it and start to want to take those positive steps and want to like realize that this could be their bottom today. It could start right this second.
Yeah. So I think, first of all, we need to know which boxes we're checking off. Like, we need to be able to identify, yeah, this might be for me. And so the first thing I want to implore is exchange your skepticism for curiosity. Okay? A curious person wants to learn. They're open to new information and new ideas. A skeptical person is the opposite. And so, and it's like a lens on a camera. You're just going to use a different lens. You're just going to go a little more wide angle. You're going to be a little more open to what's out there. And that's the first thing. Then there are a couple of really cool screening tools that you can use, and you can fill out in like 60 seconds. So the first one was initially developed for alcohol. It's called CAGE. And what stands out to me about the CAGE is E, which stands for eye opener. And what an eye opener is, a drink or drug first thing in the morning. But for me, it was a half a sleeve of Oreos. So needing something to get your day started, that's a really, and then the other one was the Uncope, which is initially written for drugs and then later for alcohol rather, and then adapted for marijuana. Bitten and I adapted it for food. It's 6 yes or no questions. It's like, it's basically, it gets into like the emotional patterns that addicts tend to have. And first of all, I want to say one thing, and this is something I heard from Dr. Paul Early, who's a past president of the American Society of Addiction Medicine. Brilliant man, awesome speaker. He says everyone has an abnormal relationship with food. So no matter who takes this assessment, they're going to have one or two answers that are positive. I mean, there's no human being in the face of this earth, in the current eating environment that we're surrounded in, that doesn't have an abnormal relationship with food. I mean, snacking when you're bored, that's not normal. Things like that. So, but if you have 4 or 5 answers on the Uncope, we call it the Suncope because it's for sugar, then yes. But what it tells you, it doesn't tell you that you're an addict. It tells you that you need to do digging, that you need to look into this. And so for the people that want to look into this and they're really willing, there's something called the sugar. And that's, I'm sure Bitten talked about it, but that's based on the DSM and the ICD diagnostic criteria for substance abuse disorder. And basically what it does is, first of all, the person does a preliminary questionnaire that's intense. I mean, it'll take you an hour. I mean, it's involved. And then we have them go through a series of questions. Everyone is given the exact same assessment in the exact same order in the exact same way. So it's coming from an objective playing field. And basically, they're going to say, have they experienced a symptom? Yes or no? Or did they experience it and no longer experience it? And at what age? And so when you go through this, it creates a map of your life as an addict or with the disease of addiction. And it creates peaks and valleys, and you see the symptoms coming up. And then what we do on top of that is we transpose a weight line. And so you're seeing the symptomatology of addiction move, and then the weight, like when they were doing the crazy dieting and the symptoms seemed to go like the symptoms stop. But in reality, they were doing, what do they call that? Yo-yo dieting for like 6 months, 9 months, or when they were pregnant, their symptomatology went crazy, or when they left their house for the first time when they were 18, all of a sudden they had freedom, or when they moved across the country, or when their mom died, and you start to see like they're using the disease is actually coming in to help them cope. And this actually is mind-blowing to me, but I see it all the time where people end up becoming grateful for that they had the illness because it got them through those times. Yeah. Like it got them from having to, in their own life. And that's not an uncommon story. But that, if you really want to know where you're at, I think, and that's invaluable, because like if I'm going into a situation where I'm going to be on the road traveling, I'm going to be in, I'm going to be a situation where I would normally use, I put that map in my suitcase. So when I get to my hotel room and I open up my suitcase, there it is. These are the facts of my life. It's unavoidable. Like it kills denial, at least denial of the fact that, yes, hi, my name's Dave and I'm an addict. And I think, and I understand why people have a little bit of grief with the whole like, I am thing. And we know that I am is powerful, but like for me, my addiction is a superpower right now. Like, because if I decide, like, evolutionary standpoint, like we were the ones that kept our tribe alive. We were the ones like, hey, Chuck, we need food. Let's go get antelope. We would be like, all right, let's go. Like, we're go-getters. We solve problems. We figure out solutions. And so I can do that today because I'm not encumbered by substance. My brain is hardwired to get stuff done. And to the point where people rely on me. And that's because I have addiction. There's nothing else that causes me to have that. And so, like, I had to transcend all my suffering, all the hardship, all the pain to get me to that. And it was worth it.
Man, I love that. That's amazing. I wanted to ask you about the foods themselves and all of these tools and resources that you are listing. Absolutely amazing. And when was, I would call myself a sugar addict because as you were talking about the blueberry, I can relate to that completely. A few summers ago, fruit would kind of fall from somebody's tree and I'd pick it up in the summertime and I'd have it like whether it was a plum or a peach or something, and I would eat it. And then the cravings would come on and I would want other things within like 20 or 30 minutes. And so, yeah, I'm kind of like you. Like, I'm never going to tell somebody that fruit is an unhealthy thing. I just know for me, it triggers those things you talked about. What comes next and after that, and the consequence of that. So, however, like when I decided to try carnivore diet, I wasn't expecting any of that. I wanted to try carnivore diet for 30 days and just see what happens. And that was about 5 years ago. And so we also know that just consuming the food has such an impact. So why is it that like an hour ago I was feeling hungry, I went and ate like 10 eggs, I just feel really good. And I'm looking forward to my dinner. I think I'm going to have a ribeye tonight. I might have some fried eggs with that as well. I look forward to that, but I don't feel addicted to that. What is it about the food itself that has these addictive properties? And could somebody also approach it by changing the diet and see if it makes some of these other practices much, much easier?
So food is funny, you know, and the reason I say that is because from an addiction standpoint, we have substance and behavior addictions. Okay. A substance addiction would be like, I'm addicted to crack cocaine or I'm addicted to alcohol. A behavioral addiction would be like, I'm addicted to porn or gambling. Okay. Food's both. Food is a substance and a behavior. I mean, you could argue that drinking is a behavior, but I really think food is much more entrenched to social norms. So it's interesting, and like, you have people like my mom, right? And I'm addicted to food like it's a substance, but my mom's addicted to food like it's a substance and it's a behavior, right? Like she'll tell you after her meal's done, she's sad. She's sad. She's like genuinely like, oh man, she's disappointed. But in 20 minutes, it's gone. Right. And so I think food's interesting. So I want to preface the next things I say with that. Okay. So there are certain foods that, I think elicit a response from us. And I think it's about neurochemistry. I think it's about dopamine. I think it's about endorphins. I think it's about, oh, this is new. But there's like we know as soon as a carbohydrate enters into our mouth, our mouth, our oral system releases amylase to start breaking down starch. So I don't know. We don't know the science necessarily exactly, but by the time that I've bitten into that blueberry, it's game on. I mean, it's not like it has to be processed or anything. And there's this really crazy thing called euphoric recall. And euphoric recall is basically you remember all the pleasure of it and you forget about all the pain. It's euphoria. So the blueberry, the pie that my father-in-law used to make, the whipped cream, it's like, I remember picking blueberries with my aunt Susan, my cousin Susan, who's, elderly now. And, she's mouthfuls, like, in the fields and the smell and the whatever. It's crazy. So we're hardwired for that. And again, I think that goes back to the salience thing. It's just that we're remembering things that we really don't need to be remembering. They're not really important. So the problem is that when we approach it from a food angle alone, we aren't treating addiction at all. We're just stopping the using. And so what that is like when an alcoholic just gets dry. And there's a word for that. They call them dry drunks. And trust me, the family would much rather them drunk.
Wow.
They're absolutely miserable. And we know people that have given up low carb, and they are not fun to be around. They're bears. They're grumpy. They're irritable because all they want to do is use, but they use willpower every single time not to. And so that's what, but really what we need to do is rewire the brain. And so what happens is, like, for instance, like if someone, this is my mom's spiel, like if someone has a heart attack and they have a bypass, they develop what's called collateral circulation, which means that the blood just moves where it needs to go, but it has to take a detour. It has to find a new route. And so we need to encourage the brain to do that. And so one of the ways that we can do that, first of all, is like therapeutic ketosis. I think that's very helpful, because we can get the brain and the mitochondria to reset. And I'm not an expert on it. If you want to learn more about that, I highly recommend you talk to Anna. But we know that happens. And we also know that it's very hard to binge on certain things, right? And I think, like you're talking about, like boiled eggs and things like that. And so, yeah, we can incorporate those things and use those things as tools or bridges, but I don't see people eating 24 eggs a day for the rest of their life and, like, being okay long term if that's not what they want. And I was against the concept of carnivore for the longest time, and I started it about 8 months ago because Bitten told me to.
Oh.
And I had a mold issue, and it's so easy. And I've been diagnosed. I didn't talk about this. I was diagnosed with ADHD basically like in the first grade.
Hmm.
I've been on meds for most of my life, minus a couple years when I just removed them and my life got crazy. But in carnivore, I was able to half my dose. There's like a therapeutic benefit to just eating animal food. So
Wow.
when we transition people into recovery, we have something called the get out of the food system, and it's very similar to carnivore. There's a little bit of vegetables for people that want them, but it's and that's like a factory reset.
Wow.
And we encourage people after they've done that, we do it for 21 days, and then you can test. Do you know what? Half the people don't test. They don't care. They're happy. They don't have cravings. They feel good. They're energized. Why test? And that's fine. And so we have people that have done the 21-day thing like 9-10 times in a row. So, and I think that's what carnivore does. It eliminates the noise. So I think, but I just worry about, and there's so much diet mentality running through, and in our community is mostly women. So the diet, and like, I'm not impacted by diet mentality like they are. First of all, I've never really had a weight problem. Second of all, I'm a male. I mean, I think male food addicts suffer from different things. And I have found that most of the men that want to recover are more of the emotional male, kind of like the sweetheart male, more sensitive, so, but that being said, what men struggle with is their loss of control, which goes against sort of like the male dynamic for ego and pride, and
Mm.
so it's the pain that they can't stop even though they really want to. Whereas a
Mm.
woman, that might be true too, but oftentimes it's more along the lines of vanity and things like that.
I see. Wow.
Yeah.
Well,
I
first
don't
of
know
all,
if I
that
even
was,
answered that question.
yes, you did. I was just going to say that was a magnificent answer to the question. So many of your answers today and explanations of things have really opened my eyes to different perspectives. And thinking about the dry drunks, for example, that's fascinating to me. I'd never considered that. And I also have never heard you say that you'd ever tried a carnivore diet. So I wasn't expecting
Yeah.
that at all.
Yeah, I
That's
did. I
interesting
had
about
to,
the
and
ADHD.
I did. And it's been interesting and easy. And I tell you, the start was not fun, but like 3 or 4 weeks, but it was worth it. And I'm at the point where I can eat a couple things here and there. Like, I'll, like, once a week wrap a burger and lettuce, and I think that's the most fantastic thing in the world. It's funny what you
Nice.
want when you give
Yeah.
up everything except for meat. It's like weird,
Yep.
that, like, I really wanted a piece of romaine. You know what I mean?
Decadent
But
romaine.
I know, I'm living large. But yeah, it's working for me and for my recovery. But it's not for everybody.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I'm going to out myself as I say I'm carnivore. I bought an onion and it lasted me like an entire week because I'd cut like a quarter of it and dice it up and have like it sauteed with like my sliders or whatever. Like, wow, that onion's like really good. I have like a
Yeah.
minuscule amount, but
Yeah. Yeah. It's like a
interesting how that
tablespoon at a
happens.
time. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Tell us about Sugar X Global. I'd love what you guys have done, and we've heard explanations from both Judy and Anna.
Sure.
But yeah, can you tell us about your work?
Yeah, so our goal is to eliminate the guilt and shame that revolves around the disease of addiction, specifically food addiction. So that's what we try to do. I mean, when we started, that's what we wanted to do. I mean, there's so much guilt, shame, remorse, regret around this thing, and it's not, it's normal to be an alcoholic, but for some reason, it's not normal to be a food addict, even though it's much more prevalent. So, anyway, so we developed CARE. So what CARE is: connection, action steps, recovery, protection, and education. Connection is, we've talked a lot about connection. We can't be alone anymore. We need to open up about real stuff. We need to be able to have real conversation with people. And I mean, I think most of the people in our community are at the point where small talk is just boring. It's just, we want to be able to really talking about what really matters, getting in touch with the kind of the things that we're feeling, being able to talk about it and communicate it. Action steps is, we need to know what to do. We like really don't know what to do. We need a roadmap to follow. So we provide people with the things that work. And recovery protection, which I haven't mentioned at all, which is bizarre, but recovery protection is our take on relapse prevention. So we feel like relapse prevention is like, as a term, it just sounds like you're waiting for something bad to happen. It just sounds like, well, I hope I don't use. And we just don't like the tone of it. So we reframed it recovery protection. And basically it's taking a positive spin on protecting your recovery and making it fun. We have these cue cards we have people use, and it goes through the cue, the custom, and the consequence that I was talking about. And then education is that we have to stay ahead. And that it's not you. I mean, us, like the plural, like we, me, Judy, Anna, and all our members. We have to stay ahead of the curveball. And we're really open to using information from various places. I read kids books every week to addicts. Do you know why? They go straight to your heart. They do. They bypass your little thinking brain with the little cute little pictures and the fluffy bunnies, and it gets right, like the Velveteen Rabbit. I get addicts sobbing about the Velveteen Rabbit. They're like, I'm not vulnerable. I was okay. Read the Velveteen Rabbit out loud and talk to me in 20 minutes. It's incredible. So I think we have to think outside the box. You were talking about how like addiction is a cage. Yeah, we have to like blast open that cage. So we have a community where people get to interact with each other and with us. Throughout the week, we run groups, we coach them, we support them, they support each other. We have awesome things like Commitment Corner, where people can like make a commitment and hold themselves accountable. Because if I just tell myself what I'm going to do, I'm making a rule. We break rules all the time. But when other people know about it, it's on another level. We don't want to let them down. And that goes back to some of the self-worth stuff we were talking about. We get people involved with, you know, planning their trips out, planning the food out, planning what they're going to do when their mother-in-law says this to them. It's about being prepared. Judy's like plan, prepare, and protect. Those are the 3 Ps. That's like, you need a plan. You need to know what you're going to do. You got to prepare. You got to get ready. Like, planning is like the grocery list. Preparing is getting the food in the house. Protecting is like chopping the veggies and cooking the meat, so we have to get people through the 3 phases to understand that there's the pre-work, the work, and the post-work. And that and they all do it together and they have a blast. So this should not be dreadful. This should be fun. You should get excited about learning again, about growing, about being able to, like, I remember going to bed for the first time and looking back on my day and realizing that I didn't want to use. And I just started laughing. I just couldn't help. I just started laughing because, like, I had wanted to use for 30 flipping years. And all of a sudden I don't want to use. This is funny. Like, I want you to have like that kind of reaction, just to be bewildered by the wondrousness of what life is like when you get connected with the right people and you start doing the things that really matter.
Man, well, that's an awesome way to end this conversation. I love it, dude. And I've always loved and respected the work that you guys do. And I've noticed that it is very you're in the trenches, like you're working with people. And when you're
Yeah.
in battle, anything is fair game. And whatever it is, you guys are able to be creative and make it fun, take something that's very serious and have fun with it. Like you said, laugh about things, realize that, at the end of the day, we're not here for very long and we have a minute on this earth to maybe make an impact and then we're gone. And like we can still appreciate those things. And I don't know. Your work is amazing. This has been an awesome, awesome conversation. I've
Yeah.
really, really appreciated
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
chatting with you, David. Where would you like people to go to find you and connect with you and your work?
Yeah, so sugarxglobal.com. Our website's a little rusty, but when you're there, you can grab the checklist to get the 3 steps to crushing your cravings. And it's 3 steps. And then we have a skills manual, which is pretty new. And that goes back to the neuroplasticity, changing the brain. It's a compilation of tools that you can really use to start to change the way that you're thinking. And you can also just get on a call with one of us. It's totally free, no commitment. It's right there on the website. And then also the get out of the food system, which is that we'll walk you through the steps to getting clean. It really demystifies the whole process. So I think that's a great, those are 4 things you can do. I would do them in that order, but you don't have to do them in any order you want. They'll still work. But getting in touch with someone else that understands what's going on is huge. I would just end with the fact that basically we look at the disease of addiction like there's a red dog, and in your recovery is your blue dog. So the red dog is trying to kill you, and he's relentless. So we have to keep feeding our blue dog. We have to keep responding to the things that the red dog says. And when you do this work, and by the way, the red dog blue dog tool it's in the skills manual, and it's you'll be like, well, this is stupid. It's so simple. Yeah, it's simple. It's effective. Basically, the red dog will tell you you're a sorry loser, and your blue dog will be like, no, I'm not. Look at all that I accomplished today. And that's just an example. But when you start to take that deeper, you follow the conversation, you realize that this is happening under the surface all the time. Negative self-talk, automatic negative thoughts. I mean, they have fancy terms for it, but reality is your brain wants you to often feel like you don't matter. And by doing this work, you can, and you will. So I think that I would encourage you to just take a piece of paper, fold it in half. What is your brain telling you that's destructive? How do you want to respond? That's it. You do that for 2 minutes a day, you're going to change your brain.
Wow. Well, I would encourage our listeners to not only do that practice, but go to your site to grab all those resources. It's amazing. And just the ability to do a consultation call with you guys. And again, just connect with somebody who understands. I think is so valuable. I've absolutely loved having this conversation.
Yeah, awesome.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's been a thrill.
It's been great, man. I've had a really good time. I can tell you very much love this stuff, and I can tell how happy you are being on the other side of your addiction. And like most of us, trying to share that message with others once you're on that other side it's just so joyous. It's amazing work. So
life is good today.
That's awesome.
You just got to remind yourself to enjoy it.
Love it.
Yeah,
I love it, Dave. This has been great. Thank you so very much for coming on the show today, and thank you for spending the time. We really appreciate you.
Love it.
And this has been another episode of Boundless Body Radio.